Started chaffinches and sparrows. Let's going to continue with our story. Let's going to finish our story of the BFG. Let's see what happened. We were seeing capture was our chapter, and then we saw, let me see if I can find it. That was our chapter. Yeah, we were in the middle of it. We saw how they all arrived. They were really scared. Just taking it slow to don't wake them up. What will it happen? Let's see. Let me show you something. What's going to happen? The soldiers crept forward with their ropes and chains. All of them were trembling mightily. None dared speak a word. The BFG, with Sophie now sitting on the palm of his hand, stood nearby watching the operation. To give the soldiers their due, they were extremely courageous. There were 6 well-trained, efficient men working on each giant, and within 10 minutes, 8 out of the 9 giants had been trussed up like chickens and were still snoring contentedly. The 9th, who happened to be the flesh lamp eater, was causing trouble for the soldiers because he was lying with his right arm tucked underneath his enormous body. It was impossible to tie his wrists and arms together without first getting that arm out from underneath him. Very, very cautiously, the 6 soldiers who were working on the flesh lamp eater began to pull at the huge arm, trying to release it. The flesh lamp eater opened his tiny piggy black eyes. "Which of you foul bastards is wiggling my arm?" he bellowed. "Is that you, you rot-stomach hagger?" Suddenly, he saw the soldiers. In a flash, he was sitting up. He looked around him. He saw more soldiers. With a roar, he leaped to his feet. The soldiers, petrified with fear, froze where they were. They had no weapons with them. The head of the army put his jib into reverse. "Human beings!" the flesh lamp eater yelled. "What is you all flash-banking rotsome half-baked beans doing in our country?" He made a grab at a soldier and swept him up in his hand. "I's having early suppers today!" he shouted, holding the poor squirming soldier at arm's length and roaring with laughter. Can you see it? He looks pretty scary, doesn't he? Sophie, standing on the palm of the BFG's hands, was watching horror-struck. "Do something," she cried. "Quick, before he eats him." "Put that human being down," the BFG shouted. The flesh lamp eater turned and stared at the BFG. "What is you doing here with all these grotty twiglets?" he bellowed. "You is making me very suspicious." The BFG made a rush at the flesh lamp eater, but the colossal 54-foot-high giant simply knocked him over with a flick of his free arm. At the same time, Sophie fell off the BFG palm onto the ground. Her mind was racing. She must do something. She must do. She must. She remembered the sapphire brooch the queen had pinned into her chest. Quickly, she undid it. "I's guzzling you nice and slow," the flesh lamp eater was saying to the soldiers in his hand. "Then I is guzzling 10 or 20 more of you, midgy little maggots down there. You is not getting away from me because I is galloping 50 times faster than you." Sophie ran up behind the flesh lamp eater. She was holding the brooch between her fingers. When she was right up close to the great naked hairy legs, she rammed the 3-inch-long pin of the brooch as hard as she could into the flesh lamp eater's right ankle. It went deep into the flesh and stayed there. She's brave, isn't she? Really brave of her. There it goes. The giant gave a roar of pain and jumped high in the air. He dropped the soldier and made a grab of his ankle. The BFG, knowing what a coward the flesh lamp eater was, saw his chance. "You is bitten by a snake!" he shouted. "I see it by eating you! It was frightsome poisonous viper! It was a dreadly dangerous pit-scream viper!" "Save our souls!" bellowed the flesh lamp eater. "Sound the crumpets! I is bitten by a seducing venomous pit-scream viper!" He flopped to the ground and sat there, hauling his head off and clenching his ankle with both hands. His fingers felt the brooch. "The teeth of the dreadly viper is still sticking into me!" he yelled. "I is feeling the teeth sticking into my ankle!" The BFG saw his second chance. "We must be getting those viper's teeth out at once!" he cried. "Otherwise, you is deader than duck soup. I is helping you." The BFG knelt down beside the flesh lamp eater. "You must grab your ankle very tight with both hands," he ordered. "That will stop the poisonous juice from the venomous viper going up your leg and into your heart." The flesh lamp eater grabbed his ankle with both hands. "Now, close your eyes and grit all your teeth and look up to heaven and say your prayers while I is taking out the teeth of the venomous viper," the BFG said. The terrified flesh lamp eater did exactly as he was told. The BFG signaled for some rope. A soldier rushed it over to him. With both the flesh lamp eater's hands gripping his ankle, it was a simple matter for the BFG to tie the ankles and hands together with a tie knot. "I is putting out the frightsome viper teeth," the BFG said as he pulled the knot tight. "Do it quickly!" shouted the flesh lamp eater, "before I is pinched to death!" "Oh. There we is," he said. "You can look now." When the flesh lamp eater saw that he was trussed up like a turkey, he gave a yell so loud that the heavens trembled. He rolled and wriggled the foot and he figgled, he squirmed and he squiggled, but there was not a thing he could do. "Well done, you!" Sophie cried. "Well done, you!" said the BFG, smiling down at the little girl. "You is saving all of our lives." "Will you please get that brooch back for me?" Sophie said. "It belongs to the Queen." The BFG pulled the beautiful brooch out of the flesh lamp eater's ankle. The flesh lamp eater howled. The BFG whipped the pin and handed it back to Sophie. Curiously, not one of the other 8 snoring giants had woken up during this seamsawsel. "When you is only sleeping 1 or 2 hours a day, you is sleeping extra double dip," the BFG explained. The head of the army and the Air Force drove forwards once again in their jeep. "Her Majesty will be very pleased with me," the head of the army said. "I shall probably get a medal. What's the next move?" "Now you is all driving over to my cave to load up my bottles of drinks. We can't waste time with that rubbish." "It is the Queen's order," Sophie said. She was now back on the BFG's hands. So the 9 jeeps drove across the BFG cave, and the great dream loading operation began. There were 50,000 jars in all to be loaded up, more than 5,000 to each ship, and it took over an hour to finish the job. While the soldiers were loading the dreams, the BFG and Sophie disappeared over the mountains on a mysterious errand. When they came back, the BFG had a sack the size of a small house slung over his shoulder. "What's that you've got in there?" the head of the army demanded to know. "Curiosity is killing the rat," the BFG said, and he turned away from the silly man. When he was sure that all his precious dreams had been safe loaded onto the jeeps, the BFG said, "Now we is driving back to Billy Popper's and picking up the frightsome giants." The jeeps drove back to the helicopters. The 50,000 dreams were carried carefully jar by jar onto the helicopters. The soldiers climbed back on board, but the BFG and Sophie stayed on the ground. Then they all returned to where the 9 giants were lying. It was a fine sight to see them. These great air machines hovering over the trussed-up giants. It was an even finer sight to see the giants being woken up by the terrific thunder of the engines overhead. And the finest sight of all was to observe those 9 hideous brutes squirming and twisting about the ground like a mass of mighty snakes as they tried to free themselves from their ropes and chains. "I is Flash Blanket!" roared the flesh lamp eater. "I is a Split Wiggle!" yelled the chill chewer. "I is Swats Wallopet!" bellowed the bone cruncher. "I is Ghost Gruggle!" howled the manhugger. "I, Gunsel Whispered, is Gunsel Sweepet!" shouted the meat tripper. There they go. Flesh Lamp Eater is absolutely massive, isn't he? There they go. "I's Flangangold!" screamed the Might Masher. "I's Flop Groggled!" squeaked the Wizard Gulper. "I is Grot Squingled!" yowled the Blood Blotter. "I is Bob Muggart!" stretched the Butcher Boy. The 9 giant carrying helicopters each chose a separate giant and hovered directly over him. Very strong steel hawsers with hooks on the ends of them were lowered from the front and rear of each helicopter. The BFG quickly secured the hooks to the giant's chains, one hook near the legs and the other near the arms. Then very slowly the giants were winched up into the air, parallel with the ground. The giants roared and bellowed, but there was nothing they could do. The BFG, with Sophie once more resting comfortably in his ear, set off at gallop for England. The helicopters all banked around and followed after him. It was an amazing spectacle. Those 9 helicopters winging through the sky, each with a trussed-up 50-foot-long giant slung underneath it. The giants themselves must have found it an interesting experience. They never stopped bellowing, but their howls were drowned by the noise of the engines. When it began to get dark, the helicopters switched on powerful searchlights and trained them on to the galloping giant so as to keep him in sight. They flew right through the night and arrived in England just as dawn was breaking. Right, we will have tomorrow the next chapter that is called Feeding Time. I wonder what it will be about. Have a lovely afternoon. Adios.